Welcome to this breakout session at Atmosphere Live. I'm Patricia Rundle, and our topic today is products. What makes them great, how we make them better, and how we can dream big to bring things to people that we might have never thought possible. We're going to talk about that for the next 45 minutes, and we have a great lineup, including John McMahon of HP, Eric Songleton of Chicos, and Andrew Bowers of the Google Chrome team. I'd like to hear from you out in the audience as well, and if you have any questions for one of our panelists, just log in and enter it at the bottom of the screen. We'll get to as many of them as we can. In the meantime, I want to start at the beginning, at the design stage, because no matter what industry you're in, this is an area that will impact everything you do for your customers and has undergone an absolute sea change. To help us understand that shift, I'm happy to be joined by Frederik Pferdt and Andrew Bowers of Google. Great to have both of you with us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Frederik, I want to start with you. The buzzword in your field is design thinking. But for those of us who aren't designers, how would you explain that phrase if we were just chatting over coffee?
So the first thing I would tell you is that it's far more than a buzzword. It's an entire formalized process for how we as product makers can get much closer to the people who use what we create. The second thing I tell you is that design thinking boils down to a very human trait, empathy. It's not sympathy where you just acknowledge that someone wants a new feature or is frustrated with one that's already there. But empathy, an intentional effort to understand people's aspirations about how they live, work, and play.
So connect the dots for us between empathy and product design.
So a few weeks ago, my team was invited to spend some time with the accessibility engineering team here at Google. This is a dedicated team driven to make our products as accessible to as a wide range of abilities as possible. But to understand the lack of access, you have to empathize. That meant we had to understand what it means to not see or hear for a day. That's where you really begin to understand the design problem at a deep level.
Frederik, you mentioned that design thinking is a formal process. And if I'm someone listening today and I'm thinking about adopting it for my company and culture, what advice would you give me?
So first of all, it has to be a good fit. So in our case, we took the defined stages of design thinking and made them googly to fit the way we work. For example, the empathy stage of design thinking translates for us into know the user. The ideation stage is something we call 10x thinking, because we are driven to make not incremental improvements, but very large ones, as Claire mentioned earlier. And the prototyping phase of design thinking in our language is be prototype driven or launch and iterate.
Yeah, that idea of rapid prototyping or failing fast comes up often in the Google culture. Why is it so important in design?
So no matter how much I emphasize, my understanding of your need is only an approximation. So I have to give you something, a screenshot, a 3D model, a popsicle stick mock-up, for you to tell me how close I am.
Well, what, you don't have all the answers?
Yeah, that's what we used to think as designers. But the person with the real answers is you. So I'm like the eye doctor who asks, is it better here or here? Instead of me leading you to what I think you need, your answers guide me to what is really going to help you. And the faster I do that, the more quickly I can zero in on what you really want.
So how does design thinking connect to your work at Google and how the company goes about making products?
So at a macro level, it inspires us to do our best work. And you see that inspiration in three distinct traits within our culture. The first is mission. We love people who have big, bold ideas they're passionate about and who dive in with a child's mindset and make statements the so-called grown-ups would call impossible. The second trait is transparency. Our default at Google is to share things, up and down the management chain and across the company. When you have transparency in product development, it builds trust. More important, it reinforces the idea that everyone can participate. That brings me actually to the last trait, voice. We believe that a great idea can come from anywhere. That means if I'm really going to do my best as a designer, I need to listen closely to help me make your experience with Google products that much better.
One of the areas, Frederik, you apply these traits is in the center at Google known as the Google Garage, which is very cool. And if I'm a company that wants to create more innovative products, help me understand why it's important to have this kind of physical space.
Absolutely. So environment influences human behavior. If you want to encourage creativity and wild ideas in your workforce, you should create that exact environment that helps you to achieve that. In our case, that means a room with everything from an oscilloscope to 3D printers, tables that can move anywhere, and the ability to write on just any surface, walls, floor, tables. This is where really the magic happens.
Frederik, thanks so much. I'm going to bring you back for some questions in a moment. And just a reminder to people out there on the live stream, if you have any questions, please log in and type them at the bottom of your screen. So we're going to take a deeper dive into how this idea of designing products for the users has been applied to Chromebooks. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Chromebooks are a category of laptops that make computing simple. They can be easily shared with family members, have features like antivirus built in general are intended to be more intuitive than a traditional laptop. So bringing Andrew back in, Andrew, can you share some examples where this user-centric approach in action has helped on Chromebooks?
Definitely, Patricia. Well, I think let me share 3 examples where we've taken that user-centric approach that Frederik's talked about and really tried to prove it and apply it to a time-tested form factor like a laptop. Now, the first example I'd like to share is around the display, which is arguably the most important part of a laptop that you use because you're interacting with it on a day-to-day basis. Now, the dimensions of a display are called the aspect ratio, and most laptops have a 16:9 aspect ratio. And that's not driven by how you use a laptop, but rather how you watch TV. It's a widescreen cinema ratio. And really that's driven because factories sell lots of TVs. We buy lots of them, and so they optimize for that ratio. But it doesn't really apply to how you use a laptop. It's great for watching a movie, but when you want to read the New York Times or when you want to write a document, you have to scroll a lot more because it's narrower. So on the Chromebook Pixel, we took a different approach. We took a step back and said, how would a user use this? And we stretched the height of the screen until we came to a 3:2 aspect ratio. Now, that's the aspect ratio of a photograph, so it's familiar to people, but more importantly, it allows you to see more on the screen.
And what reaction do people have to something different?
Well, users loved it. I mean, they can see more on the screen. They're excited to have something that really works better for them and the way they're using the device. Now, display manufacturers thought we were a little bit crazy. They were a little skeptical. But the interesting thing is going against the grain of what people were doing really proved that something would work. And now we're starting to see more 3:2 screens on the market, which is great because it means that it's going to be a better user experience for people. Let me share another example, though, that's a little more subtle, but I think it's a good example, again, of how we focus on the user in terms of designing something that's better for people. And that's around the keyboard. Now, on a typical laptop, we use capital letters, and that's because it looks good, it's aesthetically pleasing. But if you think about it, does a capital letter appear on the screen when you press a key? No, not really, unless you press the Shift key. So again, we wanted to do something that was more intuitive and close the gap between what we do as a human and what the machine does. So we use lowercase letters on a Chromebook. And again, this is slightly different than what the industry does, but we think it feels more natural and it's more intuitive, and it's really, again, closing that gap and focusing on how someone does something with a machine. The last example I want to share with you is it's kind of a funny example. It's about an accessory for the first Chromebooks that we designed. And this is a paperclip. Now, you may be wondering about a paperclip as an accessory, but if you've ever tried to take a SIM card out of a phone or reset some device, you probably went looking for a paperclip. And it's funny how versatile they are, and the first Chromebooks were no different. When you had to reset the laptop if something catastrophic happened, which we hope it doesn't, but you could set it to a factory setting by using a paperclip on the bottom, but then you had to press a power button on the top as well. And that really involves some gymnastics. It wasn't easy to do, and so we wanted to simplify that process. We wanted to make it easier for people. But if you remember in the last 2 examples, I talked about going against the grain. Well, again, here it wasn't external, but it was internal. It would have been a lot easier to continue with the way we were doing things for our engineering teams. So we had to convince people and get people on board with doing something, but again, we thought it was better for the user. So we ditched the paperclip, and instead what we did is we changed it so where you press 2 keys on the keyboard, and then you could reset the device. So it's a lot easier, more intuitive for users. And I think all 3 of these examples just show that while it's not always easier to have a user-centric approach. I think it's better for your services and your products and, at the end of the day, for your customers.
Well, it sounds like an elegant solution that focuses on the user. Let's bring Frederik back into the conversation for a few questions that have been coming in. Frederik, from Dylan, what sort of group processes are deployed in your idea garage to help spark new ideas and free thinking?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So I think when you have three things in place, really magic can happen. The first one is bringing in the right people. So a diverse group of people is really what you want to go for. We call that a radical collaboration approach. The second thing is that you want to have a specific place or a dedicated place where you bring those people to. So we use the garage as an example where we really have an inspiring place where you can actually experiment. The third thing is basically using a process like design thinking or user-centered design to really help that those people can move ideas forward. And actually what you can do then in that space is you can actually reduce the friction from having an idea to building your first prototype.
That's great. Next question for Andrew. After all these changes to a traditional laptop that you incorporated with Chromebooks, what is the user adoption been for Chromebooks and what do you attribute it to?
Yeah, so the adoption has been fantastic. There are millions of people using Chromebooks. A lot of manufacturers, pretty much everyone is making a Chromebook. And really, I think it's attributed to the simplicity. Again, we wanted to make computing more approachable, easier for people that aren't necessarily technical, just allow them to get online and do what they want to do. And so we think that simplicity has really, really helped. Another area that's been really great to see, amazing to see, is education. So teachers and administrators love it because it's easily shareable between students, between classes. It's updatable and maintainable. And so that's fantastic to see it taking off in education and really making a difference in people's lives and even a lot of people that haven't had access to a computer. So that's very exciting.
Okay, great. Here's another one for you, Andrew, from Mario. I'm not sure about the screen ratio point. Is it easier to read? Less scrolling is always cool. But what about the presence of laptops on other cases, like watching YouTube videos or even carrying it? How does the 3.2 ratio help in those cases?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you're watching a movie, basically what happens when you have that higher screen is you have what's called a letterbox format. So you have some black bars at the top and bottom. So you still really get all of your movie on there, but you have some space on the top and bottom. And really what we did is we looked at, what were people doing a majority of the time? And for a lot of the cases, we saw people were watching movies for a percentage of the time, but they were spending a majority on other things like, reading, browsing the web, or working on documents. And so we looked at that and we optimized for that experience of a heightened screen.
Okay. And last one for Frederik from Nathan. What about scenarios or products where the users do not necessarily have a precise sense of what it is they're looking for? There are times when users or customers would much rather be shown what it is that they're looking for. How would you design and innovate in those situations?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think what we found is that people are really bad in designing for themselves. So we see that it's amazing what we can do for other people. So if you actually try to focus on one specific group of people and try to really empathize with them, literally walking in their shoes for a couple of days, you really understand what problems they're dealing with. And then removing yourself from those shoes literally and then start designing and coming up with first ideas is probably the best approach.
Well, Andrew and Frederik, thank you so much. Great session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My next guest works well outside of Silicon Valley, but is just as passionate about technology, and he has the success to prove it. Chicos is one of the most well-known providers of clothing for women in North America. It has more than 1,500 stores and has over $2.5 billion in sales last fiscal year. And they're driving even greater success using Google tools. It's a pleasure to welcome Eric Songleton of Chicos to Atmosphere Live. Eric, great to have you.
Great to be with you, Patricia.
And to those out on the live stream, just a reminder, we do welcome your questions, so please log in at the bottom of the screen and let us know what's on your mind. Now, Eric, I mentioned that you're outside Silicon Valley, You're actually on the other side of the country in Fort Myers, Florida. But you're also in an industry that we don't commonly associate with cutting-edge technology, and that's clothing.
Well, there is some justification for that. The traditional model of success in our industry is to have great product in as many stores as possible. Our focus at Chicos is different. We want to help women everywhere all the time, wherever they are, in a store, on the road, between meetings, boarding a plane. And to do that, you need technology. I've been at Chicos for 2 years, and in one of those years, we've gone from having no Google to being all Google. And now that we're more responsive and collaborative and productive, it shows.
So what's it doing, Eric?
I think the best way to explain the impact of Google is the things you see and the things you don't. We've had huge changes in both areas, so let me tell you 3 stories. The first one involves Google Hangouts, but it's really about catalyzing change. We wanted to close the time gap between our teams in Florida and our support offices in Hong Kong. Instead of spending several $1,000,000 in infrastructure to build a satellite support center, our head of technology and information, Alan Mariotti, quickly re-engineered our approach and implemented Google Apps for Work, where we can launch a Hangout session in 2 clicks at a moment's notice, connecting Hong Kong with Fort Myers and getting everyone online no matter where they are. That's one example of many. Alan ended up taking things a lot further. What our customers don't see, though, is how we're able to move away from a time-wasting and cumbersome email communications process to one that is more immediate. They don't see how we save several $1,000,000 by doing this. What they do see are better products, better and faster communication, and an even greater sense of immediacy that has positive impact throughout the company. The other thing they don't see is the cost savings. Just on the Hong Kong Hangout alone, we saved over $2 million in infrastructure we didn't have to build right off the bat, $2 million.
And this project was the catalyst?
Yes, this project actually changed everything. I think if you talk to other CIOs, everyone will tell you that there's a point at which there's a moment that lights the fuse. This Hong Kong project was ours, and it became something really big. It ignited a series of parallel implementations that we deployed across Chicos in record time, really shifting the culture in the process, which kind of brings me to my second story, actually, what we call our Chicos Digital Retail Theater. So imagine you're a woman traveling out of town, and you need an outfit, let's say, for a business meeting. Maybe it's Sunday afternoon, you're planning your trip, and you search our website and maybe put a few potential selections in a virtual shopping cart. Now, Monday morning, you might go to our mobile site to find the nearest store. You add a few notes on your design preferences, and then you say, I'll pop in on my lunch hour to try a few things on. When you arrive at the store, intelligent digital signage is there to greet you with meaningful localized content. The associate has the outfits ready, along with some suggested accessories based on your profile. You pick what you like and you're ready to go, possibly adding even more items that are special that can be sent to you overnight. In this experience, what our customers see is highly personalized service. What they don't see is the complex code under the hood that makes this all possible, and the role Google Technologies plays in the experience. Our Disco platform serves as a foundation for everything that we do, and it's written entirely in Go. Google Apps for Work is integrated throughout, and Chromebook and Google Drive are key in the deployment of images across our digital screens. With the intelligent digital signage alone, we'll be able to deploy relevant localized signage in hours rather than days. The cost savings in time alone and money is staggering. Again, we don't want our customers to see what's under the hood. We simply want them to know that wherever they are, we are too. That's the power of digital retail theater.
And it's also the reason Chicos won a 2014 CIO award for its innovative use of technology in the retail sector. So congratulations on that too, Eric.
Thank you.
What about big data?
Big data is the third story, and in many ways, I think the most far-reaching. For about 10 years at Chicos, we captured more than 90% of our customer data at the point of sale and on the internet, which is truly phenomenal. But we pretty much stuffed it in a box and said someday we're going to use this. This year, we made good on that promise to ourselves. We're doing things like rolling out BigQuery, loading in nearly a decade's worth of information, and starting to run predictive analytics and models to understand how customers are likely to behave in our stores, on our website, and using mobile. And this is important because We have 4 different brands, each with its own focus, sensibility, and loyal following. We have to be constantly thinking about what they'll want next from the brands they love. So when it comes to BigQuery, what people don't see are the math-heavy, database-driven behavioral models and a team of 15 to 20 incredibly smart people who pore over these results day after day. Now, an example of what they'll see, though, with this as we move forward is, let's say, a digital sign from a Boston proper store in Florida. You can see that on the slide. We have multiple units in every store that are strategically located, including our technology table. We can take into account a host of factors like the weather, neighborhood events, charity events, and incorporate them as data to base responsive content and marketing on. For example, this month is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We can immediately adjust our messaging to reflect this and have women socially and physically via the stores connect in cities and towns where they live. Think about playing that capability across websites, mobile apps, multiple brands. It can really start to see how we have a very strong tool for future success.
Great. Before we get to our audience questions, Eric, let me ask you one more thing. If you reflect on the last 12 months, what would you tell your other CIOs about what you've learned?
I think, frankly, I'd focus less on the technology than how we've changed as a company. Don't get me wrong, Google has great tools, but I really can't overstate how we have a new way of working, and it's contagious. I think an example to support that would be we create a phenomenal number of graphics like this one, terabytes of high-resolution files every year, and our employees have moved them all to Google Drive. As mundane as this may seem, when you're moving that amount of information around the world, cloud storage is a huge asset. We literally now have our entire marketing communications planning via Google Drive being shared and collaborated on. That's heavy graphics, planning, moving, approval of digital assets, everything, and avoiding the cumbersome method of the past while saving tons of paper too. That kind of innovative thinking is exploding at Chicos, and we wouldn't be able to do it without our work with Google.
All right, well, let's move to some questions that are coming in on the live stream. Eric, you talked about how your retail digital theater in your stores, and we're interested to learn how your store and sales associates are using Google tools such as Hangouts, Drive, and Google+. And if so, what's the impact that that's had?
Well, I think the impact is that it's really the fusion of these different applications along with the big data that's underneath everything that is creating such a huge impact. It's affecting our store associates. Certainly the customers that shop with us are seeing and I think experiencing a richer information experience and a richer communicative experience with our associates. And then really the customers themselves are having a richer experience online and in the store.
Okay. And for your employees, what about mobile? How are the business users using mobile devices and Google to support their work for your companies and your brands?
Well, as Google and some of the tools proliferate throughout the company, that does create an untethered opportunity for our associates, both, of course, in the store and in the company itself. That alone, I think, has created more and more freedoms and for our associates to do their work. And then things like Hangouts are actually time savers, remarkable time savers in that we actually use Hangouts both in the store as we're troubleshooting, for example, back to our IT department, and they can be anywhere, getting a live feed and a live communication from the point of entry to the actual troubleshooting person on the other end.
Okay. Another question coming in for you, Eric. What is your recommendation to influence culture to become more tech savvy?
That's a really tough question. I think probably the biggest thing that we've learned is it takes tremendous team effort, not only on the part of the tech teams, but also to evangelize the power of these tools and the amount of time that they can save and how they can accelerate change inside the company and accelerate work. I think once that message gets out in force, you'll see the sea of change start to shift.
Okay, and our last question for you before we let you go here. Has the Google platform influenced process improvement internally as part of any continuous improvement initiatives within your organization? And if so, how are the improvements measured in terms of internal and customer value?
Well, I think it has. I think anytime that you accelerate the velocity of communication within an organization, especially in IT, for example, but beyond IT, you have the opportunity to make things better. And we collect a wide range of metrics, both in the technology teams and outside the technology teams, to make sure that we hit certain thresholds. And we measure that on a daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis.
All right. Well, Eric Songleton, CIO of Chicos, thanks so much.
Thank you, Patricia.
So we've talked about designing for customers, and we've chatted about creating magical experiences for them wherever they are and no matter how they're connected. For our last segment, we're going to talk about connecting them using ways that push at the boundaries of our imagination. And again, if you're watching the live stream, if you have questions, please just log in and enter them at the bottom of the screen. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome Sophie Miller from the Glass at Work team and John McMahon of HP, who is putting Glass to work on behalf of its largest print customers. Sophie and John, welcome to Atmosphere Live.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sophie, let me start with you and ask a simple question. How in the world do you end up with Google Glass? And what have you learned that people listening today can apply to their product design challenges?
Sure. So Glass was really born out of a question, and it was a simple question of, are we interacting with technology in the best way possible? If the answer is no, well, then what could we do about that? And I think some important context is that Glass is actually part of Google X. And Google X, as Claire and Frederik both mentioned, is built around this idea of 10x thinking. And what this means to us is that we believe that shifting your perspective is better than being smart. So rather than trying to outsmart a problem, we focus on taking a step back, shifting our perspective, and trying to come at the problem in an entirely new way. So back to that original question of, are we engaging with technology in the best way possible? Or is technology actually starting to get in the way? And is it taking us out of the experiences, out of our work, or even out of important moments throughout our day? Our conclusion was that if we bring technology closer to our senses, it could actually be less invasive and allow us to stay more present in the moment that we're in.
Did you know what to do right away, Sophie?
I think all we knew was that it was going to take a lot of work. In fact, what Frederik said earlier about rapid prototyping was a huge part of our process from the start. And as you can see on this slide, from the beginning, Glass has taken a lot of work. And initially, it was cell phones hot glued to ski goggles and some of the other models you're seeing here. But our design team worked tirelessly to push boundaries, and that's how we got to the current form factor that we're using today.
So how does Glass for Work evolve from this line of thinking?
Great question. So when we first brought Glass to the market, we started the Explorer program. And rather than going out and telling people exactly what they were to do with Glass, we took to Google Plus and Twitter and asked one simple question: what would you do with Glass if you had it? And we got all sorts of responses. Frankly, we were blown away. And we heard from doctors and athletes and moms, authors, firefighters, and beyond. And when we looked closely at the responses, we did see that there was a subset of our explorers that were extremely eager to bring Glass to work with them. And so since the Glass at Work program started, we've seen a lot of momentum pick up in a number of different industries. So from healthcare, manufacturing, field services, oil and gas, and warehousing, just to name a few.
Well, and that's a pretty diverse group. What's the common thread, Sophie?
That's a really important question. And the common thread, as I see it, is the hands-on worker. It's the person who uses his or her hands, but could still benefit greatly from access to technology and instant information. So do me a favor, take a quick look at your hands. Imagine that they're completely occupied. You're holding a wrench, you're threading an electrical harness, or you're setting a drilling pipe. You can't hold a mouse, you can't pick at a keyboard, you can't even pick up your cell phone. If you put down your tools, you put down your work. And what we've found is that these workers, they need to stay in the moment to complete their work, but also the access to technology could help them be faster, more efficient, and even safer in what they're doing. And frankly, we're thrilled that glass is helping these people in these ways.
Great. Let me bring back in John McMahon. John, I take it this idea resonated with you?
Yes, it did. I'm actually with the Graphic Solution Services Group at Hewlett Packard, and we saw glass as an avenue into achieving our serviceability strategy, which was really focused on maximizing the uptime of our customers' printing solutions, but it also gave us the opportunity to actually interact with our customers in a new way.
Yeah, and I want to give people an idea of HP graphic printing solutions, because we're really not talking about laserjet printers here, are we?
No, we're talking about a print solution that can be up to 85 feet long. It can actually weigh 3 tons. But these devices can actually print on both sides of the medium at 800 feet per minute. This is actually one of our larger inkjet web presses. It can actually print up to 2 million books a month. So we wanted to create this great service experience that could accompany this phenomenal print solution. And we saw Google Glass as a device that actually could enable that.
And so how does Google Glass enter into things?
Well, as I said before, we were really excited about Google Glass when it hit the market, okay? And it was just a matter of finding the right application, okay, that could create that new service experience. Because you have to understand, our customers print at a phenomenal volume, and a lot of them run their operations round the clock. So any disruption to their printing, such as the quality of the print or downtime of the device, is really critical. Okay? So to get back to the application, we actually went internal. We pulled an application called HP My Room. Okay, it's basically a collaboration tool. And since we already had an Android version, we actually focused on porting that over to Glass.
And how long did that take, John?
You know, to be honest with you, it took about 2 or 3 days. And that was our first prototype. So when we accomplished that, we were really excited. We knew we were onto something. So now we have a new service offering, which is branded as HP Visual Remote Guidance. From a Glass user's perspective, it's really simple. 2 voice commands, you're in a waiting room. A service engineer will actually pull you into a private collaboration room and interact with you with the voice and the audio voice and the video at the same time.
And what does that look like?
Well, let's take a look. To Sophie's comment, this is the view of one of our press operators at the very moment they need our help. Okay, they can, if they're using Glass, they can be in the waiting room in a matter of seconds, and then the service engineer can see them in the waiting room, pull them into that private collaboration room, and immediately see what they're seeing.
Can you give us an example of what you might see?
Sure. Let's take this example. Let's say a customer has seen some streaking on their media. Okay, if they're wearing Glass, they can actually be in the waiting room in seconds, like I said, and once they're connected to a service engineer, we can actually see that experience as they see it. So then we focus on the solution. Let's say we have to replace a part on the press. We can actually walk with them to the part cabinet, validate they pull out the right part, and actually walk through the installation with them. And we can do this in a lot of manners. We can actually push YouTube videos which show them how to actually perform the removal of the part and the installation of the part.
Well, and I'm sure that there are many people listening today who have to deliver services at some level. How has Glass changed the way you do that?
Well, it's radically changed 2 of our metrics. The first metric is the time to interaction. That's the time from the first voice command to the time we actually interact with the engineer. We've reduced that metric by 80%, and that's important. It made it very simple. The second metric, which is more important, is the time it takes to come to a common understanding of the customer need. We have reduced that significantly.
And so what about internally? Does having this information make HP better as an organization?
Absolutely. HP My Room also has the ability to pull in additional resources into that collaboration session. And instead of sending an email or a voicemail explaining the problem to, say, a manager or an R&D engineer, they can actually join and engage in that session. They can see exactly what the customer is seeing. In addition, they can actually look at the artifacts we've already captured, such as still picture captures or the video recording itself. And those artifacts can actually be shared with our R&D teams, who can then understand how our customers really use the devices and actually make them better.
Oh, that sounds great. And going forward, how do you see Glass evolving at HP?
Well, as I said before, I work in the graphic solution services business, and that's fairly small, but for us, it's full customer adoption. But the other teams inside HP are actually watching us very closely, and I'm sure they'll be rolling out their own application soon.
So interesting, a shift in perspective can bring about some amazing things. John and Sophie, thank you so much. We're going to turn now to some questions that have been coming in during this session. So let me see what we've got here. Okay. Sophie, what are some of the success stories from some other industries for Glass at Work?
That's a good question. So as I mentioned, and I'll probably kind of stick to the industries, we've seen a lot of success and momentum in places like healthcare, oil and gas, manufacturing, the field service example here. We're looking forward to sharing some of those customer stories more broadly in the future. But today, all I can kind of say is those are the industries where we've seen some really incredible work.
Great. And John, this one is for you. What's the biggest struggle with implementing Glass with your customers?
I think it's the hurdle of getting over the uneasiness of understanding how to use it. I can honestly tell you that I've bought about 3 pairs of glass, and I don't even have a pair myself because I give them out to other people. And they really don't understand the experience until they actually put the pair on. Once they put the pair on and walk through those 2 voice commands and actually see the remote service engineer on the other side of the prism, it's an automatic click. They understand it immediately. And then when we start sharing out videos and giving instructions, and then actually validate, that the actual user has their hands in doing the task we tell them to do, that's when it really sets in.
Okay. Looks like we have another one for John. How has the implementation of Glass changed the culture at HP?
It's interesting. The new culture at HP is really around taking these big risks and innovating and really not asking permission anymore. Just going ahead and actually doing it. I can tell you from our plans, it was about a 3-person effort. We really didn't tell everyone, but now the news is out, everyone wants to be in on the equation.
Oh, that must have been fun to be part of.
It was really interesting.
All right, and last question. This is back to you, Sophie. What's the biggest reason you're so excited about Glass entering the work arena?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think, the first thing that jumps to my mind, and the reason that I was drawn to Glass and so many others on the team, I think, are to find ways that technology can come into somebody's life and remove barriers and make things easier. And when I think about that hands-on worker who's deskless and who's out in some sort of field doing really meaningful work, it's really inspiring to think about a way in which we can integrate technology and bring them access to information without interfering with the work that they're doing and that they need to keep doing. So that's definitely the most exciting piece, in my opinion.
Well, awesome. We're looking forward to hearing how that future unfolds. So that brings us to the close of this session, and I want to thank John and Sophie and all of our other guests, and to thank those people out on the live stream for joining us today. This session will be available for playback on YouTube in case you missed anything. In the meantime, I'm Patricia Rundle. Have a great day.